today's show, we're going to introduce you to Jeffrey Carver. He's the author of 18 science fiction novels, including the recently published duo, The Reef of Time and Crucible of Time, so that you too can learn how to keep your readers engaged and how to be good at writing sci-fi novels and to incorporate great audio into your offering. The Writers' Corner live show brings you the backstories to the stories written by storytellers from around the globe and offer you, the audience, the unique opportunity to interact with them live on the show. Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Jeffrey Carver. If you're joining us, welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. I'm your host, Bridget Hillenbander from Cape Town in South Africa. Today's stream is made possible by StreamYard and also Creative Edge. And if you want to know when we go live, please go ahead and like our Facebook page. And over on YouTube, please click both the subscribe button and the notification bell. On today's show, we're going to be talking to Jeffrey Carver about his recently released duo, The Reefs of Time and The Crucible of Time. But before we bring Jeff on screen, let me say hello and introduce you to my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She's a special needs and disabilities advocate and also the author of the award-winning Poolicious children books series. She lives in Nashville in the USA, so do let us know where you are joining us from. And so with that, Mary, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning from where I am, and we are around the globe, aren't we? So my little guy told me, I showed him where you lived, and he goes, oh, so we just have to take a boat to get to her, right?
Wouldn't that be amazing, right?
I know. So I'm so excited about today. I'm a huge fan, and I told Jeffrey before before the show, I'm a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica. So any fans out there are going to be so excited. And we have friends watching in Ireland, we have friends in Denmark watching, and the United States, and well, we have friends in South Africa watching. So, we're excited about that, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. I'm also a fan of Battlestar Galactica. So
yeah. It dates us, doesn't it? It dates us.
I know, it absolutely does.
I love it.
So for those of you who don't know Jeffrey Carver, he is the author of 18 science fiction novels, including the recently published duo, The Reefs of Time and The Crucible of Time. With his two-part novel, Carver returned to his signature series, the Chaos Chronicles. Equally popular are his star-rigger stories, including the Nebula-finalist Eternity's End, and of course, as we said earlier, the Battlestar Galactica, a novelization of the critically acclaimed miniseries. Jeffrey has taught writing in many settings, from educational television to Bread Loaf to MIT to his own workshops, and he lives out in Boston in the USA with his family. So, shall we then invite Jeffrey to the show and ask him to join us today?
Yes, we have a lot to learn. He's been doing this for a while, and he's got a lot under his belt.
Absolutely. Let's invite him to the show. And a warm big welcome to the show, Jeffrey. Great to have you join us today.
Hi, it's great to be here. After that intro, I feel as if I want to sit back and listen to what your guest has to say.
Oh, you're so funny. Well, listen up, because here we're starting right now, aren't we? Oh my gosh. It is a great intro. It makes you feel really special.
Yeah.
It's kind
Makes
of
me feel important.
I know, you are important.
Jeff, so there are sci-fi authors, and there are sci-fi authors. I want to know from you.
I'm a sci-fi author.
You're a sci-fi. Oh, my goodness, we're surrounded by sci-fi authors. So, what does it take to give your readers a sci-fi reading experience that takes them on a journey where they can't wait to turn the page and keeps them reading all night?
Wow, there's a course, isn't it?
Mhm.
It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication, and it takes a lot of rewriting. These stories don't come out the way I intend them first time around. So rewriting is a big part of writing for me. Big part. I'm a slow writer, so it takes me quite a long time. In the case of this pair of books, which, by the way, was written as a single novel, it just turned out to be so big that I needed to break it into 2 volumes. It took me 11 years to write. Now, that's not my recommendation for career management. So it does provide some challenges in keeping your audience interested in waiting during that time. But it took me that long to develop the story and to refashion it until it was what I wanted it to be. Well, I know you never actually reach the point that it's exactly what you want it to be. You could keep going forever, but you have reached a point where you say, this is good enough for people to read, and I'll be happy with it.
So how many iterations?
Go ahead.
How many iterations do you go through, and how do you? Because I think that's a dilemma that all authors possibly face, right? So how do you get to the point where you decide, let's go with this one?
Well, as for how many, it really depends on any individual chapter or scene. Some scenes actually do come out pretty close to what I want the first time, but much more often I have to rework and sometimes throw out entire sections and start over. So it's anywhere from 1 or 2 rewrites to 17 or 18 on some sections that really are stubborn. I depend a lot on good, honest feedback from. I've been part of a small writing group for, I think it's close to 40 years now. And we've it's seen people come and go, but it's just a few of us now. But they're professional writers also, so it's not quite like handing it to your mom or your best friend and saying, "What do you think?" It's handing it to someone who will give it a good critical examination and both point out big issue questions that maybe you need to look at harder to make the story come together, and small stuff. And it would be hard for me to write stories of the same quality without the good, solid feedback of trusted readers.
Absolutely.
So I think most writers do that, but I depend on it.
If they don't, they should. You bring up a really important point for anyone who's listening and watching this show and watching the replay. If you are a writer or if you want to be one, and I heard this from a publicist a while ago also, usually you should start writing, throw it out and start all over again. Because if a lot of times that first, whatever you're writing is just the beginning of kind of just the little bit of a layer on top. So, it's important for people to know out there that don't put so much pressure on yourself when writing, because you're not going to probably get it right the first time. You need to keep going back and reworking it and fixing it and changing it. And I know I was working on something the other day and I liked it at first. And then when I went back and read it, I said, I'm throwing this out. I'm starting all over again, So I think people need to understand there's this whole process to it and not to put so much pressure on themselves. And And so you bring that point up. It's something that you do that's very important to your writing process. But I am excited about this question for you, because where do you draw your inspiration from, and how do you turn it into a compelling story? Because it's so fantastical what you write. Like for me as a writer, where does that come from for you? Do you have dreams? Do you have downloads? Do you get it from reading other things and watching? Is it just like the fairies come and talk to you in your head and give you the idea?
Yes. Everything you just said is part of it. It's like, how does magic work? I draw ideas from everything I see, read, hear. Dreams I've had in my head since I was a kid. It all comes together in some mysterious way. And I think there's probably a spectrum of writers, from people who can really sort of just lay it out outline it ahead of time, see the story in its completion, and those who are much more intuitive, and stuff is going on in the subconscious and you don't really quite know what's happening until it comes out. And I fall very much on that side of things. I often don't know exactly where my story is going, or even what some of the implications are of what I'm writing, until later on, and I see the results. Just as an example, in this particular book, there was a character I introduced, an animal called a go-cat. I brought this character in because I just thought, this little starship and its small band needs an animal on board. So I created a pan-dimensional little go-cat that this strange creature brought on board. And I had no real obvious reason other than wanting that little extra depth that an animal provides to interactions. And lo and behold, she turned out to be a very important character by the end of the story. I wasn't expecting it. That's kind of how the process works for me a lot of the time. It's both. It can be very frustrating, not knowing, and it can be kind of scary, because you start doing things and you don't know if it's going to lead to what you want, or to something just out in left field. So you just plunge in and you try it and you see what happens. And more often than not, the subconscious has things to say, and you kind of have to welcome it. You have to tame it sometimes. You have to say, seemed like a good idea at the time, but maybe not. So it's a combination of kind of intuitive creativity and cold, hard, critical examination once you see what it is. But I think it's really important when you're getting a story down, to not let that critic get in the way of telling the story. The critic can come in later and fix things and tell you, take another look at this. And I find working with an editor is very helpful. Not so much in telling you, there's sort of this impression that an editor is going to tell you how to write your book, or this has to go, or for marketing reasons we need to do this. I've never encountered that sort of interference, but I've had great editorial advice where an editor says, this character is not coming through fully for me. You need to do something to strengthen this. And sometimes we'll suggest a way to do it, and as often as not, I'll look at the suggestion for a change and say, well, I see the problem. I don't think you've quite hit on the solution, but let me work on it and I'll come up with a solution. So often the suggestions, I sort of ping off them and go in a different direction and find the solution. This book is unusual. It's a first in my own career. All of my previous books were originally published by traditional publishers. This series of Chaos Chronicles had been published by Tor Books in New York, and they had done volumes 1 through 4. And there was a very long gap, which was me. and life and so on. And I'd actually been working with my editor on the manuscript, and then the publisher decided it's been too long. The other books are out of print. They weren't really, because I had brought them back into print, but they were out of print as far as they were concerned. And they opted not to continue the series. So I took them myself. I was at the time part of a writer's co-op called Book V Cafe, where I got a great deal of assistance in sort of the production, cover design, and so on. And I brought them up myself. So for me, this is the first indie original work that I've done. I've been indie publishing in the sense of putting my backlist into ebook for many years, but it was just quite a learning experience just doing that, just doing the publishing end. And that's before we get in.
Yeah, that is quite a switch.
There's so many things you take for granted about working with a publisher, about distribution and gathering reviews, and all the marketing stuff suddenly falls on you, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I'm working with a publicist now, and well, it's just, but the whole landscape of publishing has changed so much anyway that even if you're working with a traditional publisher, you might not be experiencing the same sort of degree of support that, it's they support my feeling is that they tend to support the big sellers much more than the little guy. That's not to say that a new writer should avoid traditional publishers, because I think it could be a good way to get started, and publishers like to discover new writers. So
it's a double-edged sword in that world.
Yes, it is very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we want to find out from you, Jeffrey, how do you keep your audience engaged? So you call yourself a slow writer earlier, and you don't like social media much. How then
social media is the best way.
How then do you engage your readers?
It's not easy, and I don't know that I have the real answers to this. It helps if you have a loyal reader base that's waiting for the next book, and you periodically get a message from someone saying, "I'm not getting any younger. Are you going to have that next volume soon?" And yeah, I've gotten that kind of email. So what I did, I'm, as you quoted me correctly, saying I don't really engage that much in social media because it's just not my cup of tea. But I do write a blog, and my blog goes to Facebook, and I interact with people on Facebook there. But I don't like cruise Facebook and spend any more time on it than I can help. That's just me and Facebook. That's not a general commentary on what people should do. Everybody has things that they can do well. I signed up for a Twitter account because so many of my colleagues were using Twitter, and I went through the sign up process, and then I came to a screen that said, "Look at all the things you can do with Twitter." And I just stared at it, and I reached for the little X at the upper corner and closed the window. And I have not issued a single tweet, I don't think. But that leaves open the question of what do I do? One thing I did was work very hard to get my backlist books widely available to people. There was not such a long gap, but there was still a pretty good gap between my books 3 and 4. That was from The Infinite Sea to Sunborn. And in preparation for Sunborn's launch, this was at the very start of the ebook phenomenon. It was before the Kindle self-publishing platform had developed, but there were still e-readers out there and a growing appetite for ebooks. My publisher didn't actually control ebook rights to the first 3 books, so I put those out myself and put them up for free, just so that I could helped to have a ready audience for book 4 when it came. And then once the Kindle store and the Nook store and the Apple store and all that became something you could work with, I got all of my backlist up, and I have used BookBub. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with BookBub, but you can, as a reader, you just sign up for a free account and you get a daily email telling you about great discounts today on ebooks in your chosen genre, from the writer and publishers, and you pay a pretty good sized fee to get your book put in front of 1 million or so people that day. And it is a terrific way to stimulate sales for, it's like a one-shot thing. And but it gets a lot of books into people's hands and gets people reading your story and interested. So I did, especially before the launch of the new books, I have an omnibus of the first 3 volumes, and I did a BookBub special on that, so the people would be looking for the new books. And it seems to have worked. And it hasn't worked as well as I'd hoped, but it's worked reasonably well. And the other component of this is audiobooks. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or wait until.
Absolutely. That's actually the next question that I have for you, is about your decision to, make that change and that switch, or let's not say change, let's say addition, because, when you sign with a traditional publisher, a lot of times your book does go to ebook or audio. So, you have that option, but you're adding that in. So.
Yeah. Well, with a traditional publisher, if you're a big name, your book goes into audiobook. If you're a mid-list writer, they'll probably want the rights, but they won't necessarily use them. So, for a long time, none of my books were in audiobook. And then, I guess 7 or 8 years ago, my agent sold a number of my backlist books to Audible, just in a standard publisher contract. I didn't have any control over who the narrators were of those books. And some of the results I was happy with, and others not so much. But the irony was that the books that I was really best known for at the time, the Chaos Chronicles, was what I was actively working on, were not in audiobook. And I started by trying to interest audiobook publishers in the first book in the series. And I reached out to Stefan Rudnicki, is the narrator I'm working with, and he has his own audiobook production company, and he works with Blackstone as well as a lot of other people. He's an unbelievably good narrator, has a voice that sounds like God gargling boulders, and it just he's won Grammy, he's won the Audie, he's won the Hugo.
It draws you in.
So this is something I wanted to just highlight here. So you didn't just go and grab the first narrator that you could find, or you didn't just go with a narrator that was chosen by a publicist. You didn't just go to Fiverr. You put some work into this.
Yes, it was really just a long shot. I reached out to someone whose work I really liked. And what happened was that that first book, he was able to interest Blackstone in publishing. So that was done as kind of just a standard publishing deal. And with just the one book in the series out in the Audible store, it didn't really sell very well because, who wants to listen to the first book and not be able to listen to the rest of the series? So we kept going back and forth. How can we get the rest of this going? And so I finally made the decision, and not everybody can do this. Some money became available to me to invest in the project of hiring him. I paid him out of pocket to narrate books. Now it's books 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. He's narrated all of them because I wanted the best possible audiobook out there. Now this wasn't just a calculation. Okay, if you hire the best, you're going to do the best. I love audiobooks myself. I listen to them all the time. I listen to books while I'm walking my dog. I listen to the books if I'm doing, I don't know, repairs around the house. And I've really become aware of how important the narrator's voice is in the audiobook experience. A bad audiobook narrator can ruin a really good book. A good audiobook narrator can make even a mediocre book take flight, and can make a good book really just soar. So I wanted my books to have that treatment. So and I hope that it would pay off in the long run. Now, so over the past year, he has been, and I've been working with him closely on this, not just sending him pronunciations of my alien names, but actually giving him feedback here and there on maybe passages that didn't quite come out the way I was hoping. And that's led to some interesting conversations, because he's an actor and a director, and he has his own artistic interest in this too. So we've had some kind of lively discussions about why he chose to voice something a particular way, and I was expecting something different, and we really worked together on it. It wasn't me dictating what I wanted. It wasn't him saying, well, this is how I recorded it. It was, here's why I did it this way.
Sort of
what do you think?
A collaborative
Yes.
agreement between the two of you. And you need, and what I'm sensing here is that you are saying there's a need to work closely together and collaborate.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because the audiobook isn't exactly the same thing as the written book. It has a whole other personality that's put into it by the reader. And so I wanted to respect what he was doing. Anyway, I'm really proud of the work, and the audiobooks for these new ones, Reefs and Crucible of Time, have been recorded and are in the process of getting out there. The first 4 books are available in audiobook pretty much everywhere that audiobooks are sold. These should be, will be soon. They put them up through both ACX and Find Away Voices, which is kind of an alternative that has a broader reach to many more stores. So I'm just waiting for those to go live.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
Jeffrey, we're going to take
I'm going to definitely go ahead, Jenny.
We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'd like to know how our audience and your readers can reach out to you.
Yeah,
so Jeffrey,
I want to point out.
Can you tell us? Yeah.
Right, where people can find you, but let people know you have a free writing website. I wanted to make sure we highlighted that. So go ahead.
Okay, that's it. WriteSF.com. Just the way it sounds. This actually grew out of it's sort of an interesting story, I guess. I, for a while, hosted a satellite TV program on writing science fiction and fantasy for middle school kids, and did a couple of seasons of that, and it was tons of fun. And then that ended, and a CD-ROM publisher approached me and asked to adapt that to a teaching program they were doing, and that came and went. And then I just put it up online. It's really for very new writers who need to learn about the fundamentals. It was actually written for kids, but my impression is that more adults use it than kids. And so it doesn't so much go into the finer points of how to shape your plot and whatnot. It really looks at the fundamental. What do you need to do to tell a story and make it interesting? So that's just up for free. Go to writesf.com and you can browse it and look at anything you want. And if it's useful, terrific. And if it's not, well, there are a lot of other good advice pages out there too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It was great having you on the show. And thanks to everyone who watched us today.